Okay, I'm back and we are into chapter 2. What I described earlier was I was going to try to do this in about 20-minute blocks as best I can. I think chapter 2 I can get into 2 recordings and that should do as good. So chapter 2 says God obsession. And there's a quote. It says, "Where am I? Who am I? How did I come to be here? What is this thing called the world? How did I come into the world? Why was I not consulted? And if I am compelled to take part in it, where is the director? I want to see him." And that was by Soren Kierkegaard. So the chapter starts off with people the world over are obsessed with God, however they define him. Every year, 3 million Muslims visit Mecca to fulfill their call to the once in a lifetime Hajj. Islam now makes up more than 1.2 billion of the world's population. Every year, hundreds of millions of Hindus trek to the Ganges, I'm probably not saying that correctly, Ganges River and surrounding temples to have their sins purified. Hinduism today stands at 828 million adherents worldwide. And every year, the Vatican City, the Holy See, for the more than 1 billion Roman Catholics worldwide, is the most visited place on the planet per capita. If you count the additional 1 billion people who adhere to one of the other Christian denominations or groups, you have over 2 billion people worldwide who follow the teachings of the Bible and the story of Jesus Christ. So take a guess at what percentage of the world's population believes there is no God. 20%? 15? 10? In fact, a mere 2% of the world's population considers itself atheist, those who do not believe in God. Regardless of how one tries to define him and whether one loves him, hates him, denies him, or defies him, it's hard to deny the fascination with God the world over. God as we know him is in. The fact that you picked up this book or you're listening to it says something about you, about your belief in God, or at least your curiosity. Either you're a seeker or you're a believer, and perhaps both. But there are questions that linger. Is God dead? Is he nothing more than a figment of our imagination or a crutch for the psychologically weak to lean on for security in life? Or is God real? Can we know him? Can we believe him? It doesn't take long to understand that God changes and separates everything and everybody. Fascination with God. No matter what you hear on the news about lawsuits, on prayer, court battles over the display of the Ten Commandments, nativity scenes, and the separation of church and state, there's no denying the phenomenal existence of God. Consider that Newsweek, Time, and U.S. News and World Report have featured Jesus on the cover more than 24 times in the past 10 years alone. In addition, Jesus has graced the cover of Time magazine 21 times since World War II. Apart from the past few U.S. presidents, that's more than any person in history. What did the American people believe? Well, a 2007 Newsweek poll found that 91% of American adults claim a belief in God of some sort, and 85% of Americans say that religion is important in their lives. Gallup's latest study reports that 73% of Americans are convinced that God exists. Only 3% of the American population identifies itself as atheist, being convinced that God does not exist. For the remaining 24% of Americans, the jury is still out. What this belief in God of some sort means in the personal life of the average human being varies. For now, and despite what it may or may not mean, the point is that a phenomena of God is pervasive. The evidence is found in individuals who are searching not only for who God is, but also for their own purpose on this earth. The fascination with God is also evident in the money that we spend and the books we read. Take, for instance, the best-selling book of all time is the Bible. Since the original printing press in 1455, it is estimated that nearly 6 trillion Bibles have been sold in nearly 2,000 languages. Consider the preoccupation with such New York Times best-selling books as William Paul Young's The Shack, described on Amazon as a one-of-a-kind invitation to journey to the very heart of God. Tim Keller's The Reason for God, a book that normalizes religious doubt but lays a case for belief in an age of skepticism. Or Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life, a 40-day daily devotional that helps readers find meaning in their spiritual journey. The Purpose-Driven Life is one of America's best-selling nonfiction books of all time, according to Publishers Weekly. From the fictional side, even the Left Behind series, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins' novels about the end times, written according to the Book of Revelation, has become one of the best-selling adult fiction series of all time, having grossed more than 70 million copies sold as of 2009. C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, a book originally recorded as a radio lecture series in Great Britain in 1943, has proved to be a timeless presentation of the principles of the Christian faith, as it remains a top seller even into the 21st century. Another best-selling book that spent 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list was Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. If you want to see Christian authors and theologians scramble in defense for God, put out a fictional book that makes claims about Jesus the Bible does not support. Just a quick Amazon browse alone brought up 14 books in response to the Da Vinci Code. And what about the entertainment industry? In the first decade of the 21st century, the Da Vinci Code movie ranked in over 757.2 million worldwide. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ brought in 604.3 million, and the 500,000 budget of the Christian movie Fireproof, a story about a firefighter who fireproofs his troubled marriage and turns his focus to God for direction, reaped dividends of more than 33.4 million at the box office. Good or bad, agreed or disagreed, there's no denying the phenomena of God throughout our culture. But does a cultural fascination with God mean that he actually exists? If he does exist, how important is he in our daily lives? A survey on religious beliefs reveals a very interesting pattern of how important religion is in the day-to-day lives of people the world over. For instance, the median proportion of the world's population who say that religion is important in their daily lives is 82%. Americans fall behind in the 2009 Gallup research, with only 65% claiming religion is important to them on a daily basis. But Gallup throws out a caveat. There is a strong relationship between the level of religiosity and a country's standard of living. So when Gallup surveyed the world's population, they found 11 countries where nearly every dweller, 98%, said that religion was important in their daily lives. Of those 11, 8 of them are poor nations in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Among the 10 countries where residents were least likely to report religion being important in their daily lives were Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Hong Kong, Japan, and France. All of these countries are Western and Asian democracies with the world's highest standard of living. In the 27 countries known to make up the developed world, only 38% of people on average say that religion is important in their daily lives. Compared to the other wealthy nations, if you will, the 65% of Americans who report an importance of religion make the United States look like a country of devoted converts ready to make a difference. Or are they? Dissatisfied about religion. In the United States, many postmodern sociologists are ready to resign religion to the Museum of Cultural History, arguing that in today's technological advanced age, the idea of a supreme otherworldly being is irrelevant. A lot has changed in America. Even leaders from the Southern Baptist Convention refer to the 21st century age we live in as post-Christian era. Other research reveals a growing dissatisfaction with the state of religion in America, with only about half of Americans viewing religion as being very important, and nearly 3/4 seeing religion as a waning influence. In fact, 3 out of 10 view religion as old-fashioned and out of date, and that number appears to be growing. Additionally, only 33% of psychiatrists and clinical psychologists express a belief in God. In a world of economic and political turmoil, many Americans are asking, what's the point of religion anyway? With only 4 out of 10 Americans regularly attending a church or synagogue, religious leaders are rightly wondering what's ahead. Americans, it appears, are losing hope in religion. And who can blame them? With religious practices such as liturgical repetition and hymns seemingly out of date or irrelevant, sex scandals and moral failures among major church leaders, and the self-righteous making us feel like we're never good enough, many in the millennial generation and Gen X feel stuck trying to make their way in a religious world where it seems very few represent the spiritual life they say they follow. In their book, Unchristian, David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons explain the results of their research on the attitudes of 16 to 29-year-olds towards Christianity. When those in this age group were asked to identify their impressions of Christianity, one of the most unprompted descriptions was that Christians no longer represent what Jesus had in mind, that Christianity in our society is not what it was meant to be. Think about how this has impacted you for a moment. According to Kinnaman and Lyons, the most common imagery of religion among church-going and non-church-going young people was that Christianity was too judgmental, hypocritical, too involved in politics, and too old-fashioned. Maybe you've experienced the same thing. Perhaps it's left you feeling weary of going to church or even trusting in God. Makes sense. Determined to find God. On the other hand, just because these attitudes exist towards religion's seemingly waning influence does not mean Americans do not believe in the existence of God himself. In addition to the 80 to 90% of Americans who voice a belief in God, in general, a 2006 Gallup poll showed that 90% of 18 to 29-year-olds also holds a foundational belief in the existence of God. In fact, even 80% of professional therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists excluded claim a religious preference, and 77% try to live according to their religious beliefs. And this is good news, since many clients today want their faith addressed as a part of their counseling experience. The determination to find God continues in the political landscape as well. Even the past 2 presidential elections of George W. Bush and Barack Obama were not without a focus on God. Many believe that George W. Bush was elected because of the values voter driven primarily by the religious right. And in a January 2009 case that attempted to remove any religious references from the presidential inauguration, U.S. District Judge Reggie B. Walton ruled that President-elect Barack Obama's choice of words was not in the purview of governmental jurisdiction. He could say whatever he wanted and invite speakers and prayer leaders to do the same. Associated Press later published a full-length Easter feature on the president's search for a new house of worship, quoting Obama as saying, "It takes time to be a believer. Faith cannot be forced and faith cannot be coerced." Even though the everyday faith of Americans appears to be waning, it's interesting that God is still a centerpiece of the American culture. Though abstract theology, wooden benches, and dusty hymn books appear to be a thing of the past, many Americans today are still searching for something to shake them out of the ruts and mediocrity of so much of their daily existence. With so much change, you may be wondering what is in vogue, or shall we say who? A universal longing. Though it's true that only 40% of Americans identify with a particular church or synagogue, it becomes quite obvious to the 90% who believe in God that he is not dead. And while today's culture appears far less religiously oriented, neither can we seem to quite shake free of the idea of God the world over. People just like you are lying in bed at night alone thinking about the meaning of life, their purpose, and why they do what they do. And we're left with more questions than answers. But as Hugh Ross, astronomer and astrophysicist, contends, this is quite normal. You may not be as out there as you think. And so Ross states, modern man is the only bipedal primate species for which any undisputed evidence of the drive to seek more than physical survivor and well-being exists. Thus far, evolutionists have been unable to demonstrate a development of evolution of these drives within the human species. Humans living thousands and tens of thousands of years ago evidently manifested these motivations at the same levels as people do today. Where then does this strong desire come from? Why is it that the vast majority of the world's people, regardless of education, economics, politics, technology, geography, believe in some kind of God? Well, perhaps the most significant reason of all pertains to the exquisite manner in which the physical laws of the universe serve to limit the expression of human evil and to prepare willing individuals for life in a realm where evil does not exist, i.e., heaven. So Ross alludes to a desire that lives in every human soul for something beyond mere physical survival. A yearning that lies sincerely in each of us to address the answers to the deepest and darkest questions life has to offer. Questions about the inevitability of death, isolation, and meaninglessness. That we ask such questions is normal. That we persist in these questions beyond simple answers and ignorance is supernormal, and it goes beyond race, religion, and age. A Tao philosopher in ancient China said, as rivers have their source in some far-off fountain, so the human spirit has its source. To find this fountain of spirit is to learn the secret of heaven and earth. Gandhi said, I worship God as truth only. I have not yet found him, but I am seeking after him. I am prepared to sacrifice the things dearest to me in pursuit of this quest, even if the sacrifice demanded my very life. I hope I may be prepared to give it. And the Quran states, all men turn their eyes to some quarter of the heavens. The Hindu scripture says that the wise, full of love, worship me, believing that I am the origin of all, and that all moves on through me, placing their minds on me, offering their lives to me, instructing each other, and speaking about me. They live always contented and happy. To these who are constantly devoted and who worship with love, I give the knowledge by which they attain to me. And remaining in their hearts, I destroy with the brilliant lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance in such men only out of compassion for them. And in the Bible, Moses tells about a literal face-to-face conversation with God, whereby God revealed his name and character. Yet Moses, having seen and talked with God, still didn't know who he was, as he asked him, who do I say sent me? And God chose this particular moment to advance the historic and progressive revelation of himself by revealing his name. Say that I am has sent you. Christian writers ever since have been writing and asking the question of whether God matters. As she became increasingly aware of her own spiritual impotence, Spanish mystic Teresa of Avila, a Carmelite nun born in 1515, and who would later be declared a doctor of the church by Pope Paul in 1970, once cried out, "Oh God, I don't love you. I don't even want to love you, but I want to love you." She sounds confused. Tertullian, a creative and controversial author who lived AD 160-220, resolved for himself the universal tension that exists between God and man. There is strife between God's ways and human ways. Damned by you, we are absolved by God. Along these same lines, C.S. Lewis once said, from the moment a creature becomes aware of God, and of itself as self, the terrible alternative of choosing God or self for the center is opened to it. On why we approach God, the Puritans wrote, our necessities compel us, thy promises encourage us, our broken hearts incite us, the mediator draws us, thy acceptance of others moves us. Actually, I'm going to get through chapter 2 right now. The courage to ask. So then, what does it mean to believe in God? Does it mean going to church on Sunday morning, singing about God, wearing a cross around your neck, praying every now and then, reading the Bible? Does it mean that we merely believe he exists? Or at the last agnostic station on the train toward atheism, does it mean that we entertain the difficult possibility that he might exist, but we can never know for sure? In contrast, does believing in God mean that our faith affects, even transforms the way we live every day? Like believing that God loves us and living with peace and contentment inside, having joy in our hearts, trusting him for our everyday life, knowing with certainty that he protects, guides, and cares for us, knowing that he desires to have an intimate relationship with us, that he desires to call us his friends. You are about to discover insight into why you believe, act, and feel the way you do about God, and how it's directly and indirectly tied to your core relational beliefs. Whether you know it or not, you have a relationship style that affects the way you do intimacy with those you love, and in particular, God. You will also learn how you can overcome and break free from the lies you believe about yourself, others, and God, and how they are hindering you from true intimacy with Him. So, asking the question of whether God matters is one thing. How you go about answering that question and what you do with the answer is entirely different. And whether you know it or not, you answer the question of whether God matters every day of your life by the way you live. How serious are we? Have the statistics surprised you? What shocked you the most? If the statistics hold true, we can conclude that people are obsessed with thoughts of God, either killing him, crowning him, or denying his relentless pursuit of a love relationship. But many are conflicted about who exactly this God is, if he's even out there. And our preoccupation is not just theological, political, or even psychological, it's actually intensely personal. What's the difference between cognitively believing in God and emotionally connecting, trusting, and walking with Him every day? Statistics are just numbers. We are real people with real questions, real doubts, real pain, and real struggle. If you are struggling with your belief in God right now, you may be at the best place you could be in your life. As Os Guinness explains, the important thing is not the distinction between believers and unbelievers. The vital divide is between those who care enough to think seriously about life and those who are indifferent. This is the question we urge you to ask yourself at the outset of this book. How serious am I about my own search for and belief in God? Personally and professionally, we believe that God exists and that He is the rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Our prayer for you is that you're dead serious. And then the last part of the chapter is to consider if you're struggling with your belief in God right now, you may be at the best place, again, that you could be. What would it take to convince you that God exists? What do you need from Him to be able to emotionally connect with Him, trust, and live for Him every day? And they encourage you to write these needs down and then consider the barriers that might be holding you back from connecting deeper with God. All right, so actually got through the chapter a little bit over 20 minutes. And again, I would love your thoughts, your questions. I do want this to be interactive if at all possible. And so I'm definitely interested in what your thoughts are. So I look forward to connecting back with you on chapter 3.